I didn't know that a single knock could divide a life into before and after. That morning felt ordinary in the way quiet disasters often begin, no warning, no loud signals, just a stillness that hides something waiting underneath. If I could go back, I would listen more closely to that silence. I would notice the distance that had already settled between us, the kind that doesn't shout but lingers in small, unspoken ways. Our mornings used to be warm once. Not perfect, but steady. The kind of routine that feels safe without needing to be questioned. Lately, though, everything had started to feel rehearsed. We moved around each other like strangers who had memorized the same house. Words were fewer. Eye contact even less. Even the smallest gestures, passing a cup, closing a door, felt mechanical, stripped of meaning. I told myself it was normal. People change. Life gets busy. Love doesn't always stay loud. That's what I kept repeating, especially on mornings when the silence stretched too long. I convinced myself that comfort had simply replaced affection, that this quiet distance was just another version of stability. It was easier than asking the questions I wasn't ready to hear answers to. There were signs, of course. There are always signs. Late nights that came with vague explanations. A phone that was suddenly never left unattended. Conversations that ended the moment I entered the room. I noticed them all, but I filed them away somewhere deep, somewhere safe from confrontation. Because acknowledging them meant risking everything we had built, or at least everything I thought we had. Sometimes, I caught myself watching more than living. Observing tone, timing, expressions. Searching for something I couldn't quite define. And every time I felt close to understanding it, I would pull back. Doubt would creep in, whispering that I was overthinking, that I was imagining problems where there were none. I chose that doubt. It was more comfortable than suspicion. Our child became the only thing that still felt real. Pure, untouched by whatever quiet tension had taken over the house. In those small moments, helping with homework, sharing a laugh, I could almost forget everything else. It grounded me. It gave me something to hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping, even if I couldn't explain why. That morning started no differently. The same dim light filtering through the curtains. The same slow awareness of another day beginning. I remember lying there for a moment longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, feeling that strange heaviness I couldn't name. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something quieter, something that sat just beneath the surface. Then came the knock, soft. Hesitant. Not the kind of knock that demands attention, but the kind that asks for permission. It pulled me out of that fog instantly. There was something about it, something off, that made my chest tighten before I even moved. I opened the door to find my son standing there, his face caught somewhere between confusion and uncertainty. He wasn't crying. He wasn't scared in the obvious way children are. But there was something in his eyes that didn't belong to his age, something that shouldn't have been there. I asked what was wrong, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to let that sudden unease show. For a second, he didn't answer. He just looked at me, like he was trying to decide whether he should say what he came to say, and then he did. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a simple question, spoken in the same innocent tone he used for everything else. But the words didn't fit the moment. They didn't fit our life, not the version I had been holding on to. He mentioned seeing something. Someone. A detail so small on its own, but placed in the wrong context, it became something else entirely. Something heavy. Something that didn't belong. For a second, I didn't react. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too quickly. My mind tried to reject it immediately, to reshape his words into something harmless, something explainable. Kids misunderstand things all the time. They imagine, they confuse, they misinterpret. That's what I told myself. I knelt down, asked a few questions, careful ones, neutral ones, hoping for an answer that would undo what I had just heard. But every word that followed only made it harder to dismiss. The details were simple, but they aligned too well with the things I had been avoiding for weeks. Still, I smiled. Still, I reassured him. Told him it was nothing, that everything was fine. Because in that moment, I needed it to be nothing. I needed the world to stay exactly as it was, even if it meant lying to myself a little longer. He nodded, accepting it the way children do, trusting without question. And that trust hit harder than anything he had said. When he walked away, The house felt different. The same walls, the same silence, but now it carried weight. Now it meant something. I stood there for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling everything shift without a single visible change. The signs I had ignored didn't feel distant anymore. They felt immediate, connected, real, and for the first time, I couldn't push them away. That was the moment everything started to come together. And at the same time, everything started to fall apart. I told myself it didn't mean anything. That whatever he saw, whatever he thought he understood, had to be wrong. Children fill in gaps with imagination. They misunderstand simple things and turn them into something bigger. That's what I held on to as I walked away from the door, as if repeating it enough times could make it true, but the calm didn't last. It started with a feeling I couldn't shake. Not panic, not yet, but a quiet pressure building in my chest, like something was trying to surface and I was forcing it back down. I moved through the house the way I always did, but nothing felt automatic anymore. Every step felt deliberate, every sound louder than it should have been. I began replaying his words in my head. Not just what he said, but how he said it. The hesitation. The uncertainty. There was no mischief in it, no exaggeration. Just confusion. And that's what made it harder to dismiss. He wasn't trying to tell a story. He was trying to understand something he couldn't explain. I tried to focus on something else. Anything. But my mind kept circling back to the same point, connecting pieces I had deliberately kept separate. The late nights. The vague explanations. The subtle shift in tone whenever certain topics came up. Things I had labeled as stress or distance suddenly felt like something else entirely. I didn't want to believe it. Not because it was impossible, but because it was possible. That's when I started looking, not in an obvious way. Not like someone searching for answers. More like someone trying to confirm that there was nothing to find. I told myself I was just being cautious, just clearing doubt so I could move on. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Doubt doesn't go away on its own. It demands something. The phone was the first thing I noticed. It had become a constant presence, always within reach, always turned slightly away. Even when nothing was happening, it felt like it was holding something back. I didn't touch it. Not yet. But I watched it more than I ever had before. Small things started to stand out. Messages that were quickly dismissed. Calls that were taken in another room. A kind of alertness that hadn't been there before, like someone always aware of being observed. It wasn't obvious enough to accuse. But it wasn't nothing either. I told myself again that I was overthinking. That I was letting one small moment spiral into something bigger. But the problem with doubt is that it feeds on silence. And there was too much silence now. Memories began to shift. Moments that once felt normal started to feel staged. Conversations that seemed harmless now carried a different tone when I replayed them. There were gaps I hadn't noticed before. Times when things didn't quite add up, but I had chosen not to question them. I remembered a night not too long ago. A simple explanation for coming home late. It had sounded reasonable at the time. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. Or maybe I just didn't want to. Now, that same explanation felt incomplete, like a story missing its most important part. That realization didn't come all at once. It built slowly, piece by piece, until it became impossible to ignore. I found myself standing in the same rooms, looking at the same objects, but seeing them differently. A jacket left on a chair. A faint scent that didn't belong. Things that could mean nothing, except now they didn't. Still, I hesitated because once you stop doubting the doubt, there's no going back. There's no safe place to return to, no version of things that feels untouched. You either find nothing and feel foolish, or you find something and everything changes. I wasn't ready for either, but I kept going. At some point, curiosity turns into something heavier. It stops being about reassurance and starts becoming about truth. And truth has a way of showing itself in fragments first. Never enough to fully expose itself, just enough to make you uneasy. That's exactly what happened. It wasn't a full answer. Not even close. Just a small detail, easy to miss if you weren't already looking. A name that appeared where it didn't belong. Brief, almost insignificant. But it didn't fit into anything I knew. I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to make it mean less than it did. Trying to place it into a context that made sense. But the more I tried, the less it worked. That was the moment denial started to slip. Not completely. Not enough to admit anything out loud. But enough to change the way I felt. Enough to make everything heavier, sharper, harder to ignore. I stepped back after that. Not physically, but mentally. Like I had reached a point I wasn't ready to cross. I told myself I needed time. That rushing into conclusions would only make things worse. That there could still be an explanation I hadn't considered, but even as I thought that, I knew something had already shifted, because I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was trying to avoid confirming it. And that's when I realized the truth wasn't something waiting to be discovered. It was something already there, quietly waiting for me to stop pretending I didn't see it.
By the time I stopped denying it, the house itself felt like it was holding its breath. I could walk from one room to another and sense where conversations had just ended. The air carried traces of things unsaid. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was pattern. They were careful, but not careful enough. My partner started mentioning my uncle in casual ways, slipping his name into conversations where he didn't belong. Small stories, shared opinions, references I hadn't been part of. It felt like listening to the middle of a conversation that had started long before I arrived. I nodded along, pretending I wasn't keeping score. I began to notice how often they were alone together. Not in dramatic, suspicious ways. Just ordinary moments stretched too long. A trip to the store that took twice the time it should have. Conversations that continued after I left the room. Shared silence that looked comfortable, practiced. When I joined them, that comfort dissolved. The tone shifted. Topics changed. It was subtle, but subtlety can be loud when you're already listening for it. I told myself I was being unfair. Family is family. Support doesn't equal betrayal. Yet every instinct in me was screaming that something was forming in the space I used to occupy. Not a secret affair hidden behind locked doors, but something quieter. Something that didn't need hiding because no one was calling it what it was. One night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, phone glowing in my hand, not looking at anything, just holding onto the light. From down the hall, I heard them talking again. Not whispers this time. Low voices, steady, unguarded. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The closeness was unmistakable. It carried warmth. Familiarity. The kind that comes from being emotionally exposed without fear. I felt something crack then. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Recognition. This wasn't about attraction in the obvious sense. It was about understanding. About being seen. Somewhere along the way, my partner had started sharing thoughts, frustrations, and vulnerabilities with someone else. Someone who wasn't me. And my uncle, whether intentionally or not, had stepped into that role with ease. The next day, I watched them more closely. I saw how my partner's posture changed around him. Shoulders relaxed. Voice softened. I saw how my uncle listened, not distracted, not half-present, but fully engaged. He remembered details I had missed. He asked questions I hadn't thought to ask. It stung because I realized I used to be that person. I tried to confront it indirectly. I asked my partner how they were feeling lately. Asked if something was bothering them. The answers came back vague, polished, incomplete. I was told everything was fine. That I was overthinking. That stress was making me distant. Somehow, the problem was already being reframed as me. That was when the doubt turned inward. I wondered if I had failed first. If my absence had created a gap someone else simply filled. Guilt tangled with suspicion until I didn't know which hurt more. I replayed past moments, searching for where I'd lost ground. Maybe I hadn't listened enough. Maybe I'd been too comfortable. Love, I learned, doesn't disappear all at once. It leaks out slowly. Later that evening, I noticed my partner's phone light up. A message preview flashed briefly before disappearing. I didn't see the words, only the name. My uncle's name. My chest tightened, not because of what the message might have said, but because of how normal it seemed. No panic. No secrecy. Just connection that I didn't check the phone. I didn't need to. The damage was already done. Emotional lines had been crossed quietly, without permission, without acknowledgement. And that kind of betrayal doesn't announce itself. It grows in shared moments, inside jokes, private understanding. What hurt most was realizing that if I confronted them directly, they might genuinely believe they'd done nothing wrong. There were no rules written for this kind of closeness. No clear evidence. Just a steady erosion of trust. I was watching my place in someone's life become optional. That night, I lay awake again, staring into the dark, knowing something had shifted beyond repair. Love was still there, technically. So was loyalty, at least in name. But intimacy had moved. And once it moves, it rarely comes back the same. That I understood then that infidelity doesn't always need secrecy or touch. Sometimes, it only needs attention given where it no longer belongs. And by the time you realize it, you're already standing outside, wondering when the door quietly closed behind you. After the truth came out, the house didn't explode. It froze. We moved around each other like strangers forced into the same space. No shouting. No dramatic exits. Just silence thick enough to choke on. He slept on the edge of the bed at first, then eventually on the couch. I didn't ask him to. He did it because even he understood something sacred had been broken. That he tried to talk every morning. I kept my answers short. Not to punish him, but because I had nothing left to give. When trust collapses, conversation feels pointless. Words don't repair images you can't unsee. That he started apologizing in detailed paragraphs. Not just, "I'm sorry," but long explanations about his confusion, his ego, his fear of aging, his need for validation. He called it a weakness. A lapse. A dark phase. That I called it a choice. That he deleted her number in front of me. Blocked her on social media. Showed me messages where he told her it was over. He even offered therapy. Couples counseling. Individual counseling. Any counseling. He said he would do anything except undo it. That I watched him unravel. The confident man I knew turned anxious. He checked my face for reactions. Followed me into rooms just to stand near me. Touched my shoulder cautiously, like I might disappear. Maybe I already had. At night, I lay awake remembering who we used to be. Road trips. Laughing in grocery store aisles. The way he used to pull me close without thinking. Those memories fought hard against the betrayal. They argued that people make mistakes. That love deserves forgiveness, but another voice inside me grew louder. Love shouldn't require investigation. Love shouldn't make you feel replaceable. Love shouldn't force you to compete for basic loyalty. That he said it was one weekend. As if betrayal could be measured in hours. As if duration changed damage. I kept thinking about that hotel room. About the version of him that existed there. The version that wasn't mine. That I asked myself the hardest question. That if I stay, will I ever stop wondering? He tried grand gestures next. Flowers delivered to my office. Handwritten letters left on the kitchen counter. He recreated our first date, down to the same restaurant and the same dessert I used to order first. He reached for nostalgia like it was a lifeline, but nostalgia doesn't erase reality. One evening he broke down completely. Sat across from me and cried without pride. I was stupid, he said. I almost lost the best thing in my life. Almost, the word echoed that he still thought this was salvageable because I was still there. Because I hadn't packed a bag. Because I hadn't screamed that he didn't understand that leaving doesn't always look dramatic, sometimes it's internal. First that I started imagining a life without him. At first it terrified me. 5 years is a long time to untangle. Shared friends. Shared routines. Shared future plans. I would have to rebuild from scratch, but then I imagined a life with him, constant doubt. Random triggers. Every late meeting reopening wounds. Every business trip replaying the hotel receipt in my head. Every unknown number sparking anxiety that I realized something uncomfortable. Staying would be harder than leaving, not because I didn't love him, but because loving him now required shrinking myself. That he asked me one final time, "What can I do to fix this?" I looked at him carefully. At the man who once felt like home. "You can't fix it," I said quietly. "You can only live knowing you broke it." He shook his head. "People survive worse than this." "Maybe," I replied. "But I don't want to survive my relationship. I wanted to feel safe in it." That was the difference. That he wanted another chance, that I wanted peace. The next morning, I packed slowly. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just efficiently. He watched from the doorway, disbelief settling in as reality replaced hope. "You're really leaving?" he asked. "Yes." "For good?" I paused. Not because I doubted myself, but because 5 years deserved a moment of silence. "For good." He tried one last time. "I love you." I believed him. That was the tragedy, that he probably did love me. In the only way he knew how. But love without discipline is selfish. Love without boundaries is reckless. Love without loyalty is unstable, and I refused to build my future on instability. That I walked out without slamming the door. Without tears in front of him. My heart was heavy, but it was steady. For the first time in months, I wasn't questioning my instincts. That I chose myself. That a year later, I ran into him by accident. Different city. Different version of me. He looked surprised. Older somehow. He asked how I was. I told him I was good. That he said he thinks about me all the time. That I nodded politely. That as I walked away, I realized something powerful. The betrayal didn't end me. That it ended the illusion, and sometimes, losing the illusion is the only way to find the truth about what you deserve. Some betrayals don't destroy your life, they reveal it.